Good evening and welcome to the Hustings for the University of Dublin, Trinity College, Seanad Bye-Election. My name is Ursula Halligan and I'll be moderating tonight. As you can see, the candidates are all lined up and ready for action, and we're all set to go too. But just before we do, two things. First, please take a moment, everyone, to look around you and take note of the fire exits. There are two at the very back. There are two just there, and there's two up here at the front. And secondly, it's my great honour to invite the Provost of Trinity College, Linda Doyle, to address us. Provost.
Thank you. Thank you, Ursula. Hello, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I'm actually the returning officer, and I have to say it gave me a little frisson of delight with the idea I've been posting my ballot to myself. But I haven't filled in that ballot form yet, and we're delighted to be here with these very brave candidates, and we're going to have a second bunch after these. And Ursula was saying earlier, and I would totally agree with her, that I have huge respect for anyone who puts their head above the parapet and puts themselves out there for election. So I'm delighted to have you all here. I'm not going to delay much longer, just to encourage everyone to engage deeply with this. We have had a representative in the Senate for 100 years, so it'll be brilliant to be adding a new name to that list. If you have a vote, you should have your ballot paper by now. There's still actually time to change your address if there's an issue with you getting your ballot paper. And please, as I said, engage, look at everybody's policies deeply, and if you have a vote, please do vote. I think it's really, really important for us. It really matters to us in the university that we have the representation that we need and that will fight for this university and fight for the third level sector generally, which is much needed. So thank you.
Thank you, Provost. That's wonderful.
One last thing, I have to thank Kevin and the communications team who've done an amazing job in bringing this together, Tom and all his team, because I know how much work goes into these things. So thank you very much, Kevin. It's brilliant.
Okay. Thank you, Provost. Well, this is the first by-election to the University of Dublin Trinity College constituency for 43 years. On that occasion, the winner was Catherine McGuinness, and she went on to serve on the Supreme Court. The question for us tonight is, who's going to win this by-election? Well, that will be up to the 67,799 people eligible to vote, many of whom we hope are here tonight or watching online. In total, 17 candidates have thrown their hats into the ring, and for the first time ever, more than half of them are female. It's a wonderful testament to the spirit of democracy here in Trinity College, but from a logistical and practical point of view, it presents challenges for the organisers of an event like this. So we've decided to split the 17 candidates at random into two separate panel discussions to run back to back. Each panel discussion will run for approximately 1 hour. Each will consist of 3 questions. Questions, by the way, that were created based on feedback from alumni and students about what topics they wanted discussed here tonight. And our thanks to all those who took part in that process. So without further delay, I will introduce our first panel. And I would ask you, please, to hold your applause until after all the candidates have been introduced. So, starting from my left, working around to the right, we have Sive O'Neill, Assistant Professor at the School of Law and Government in DCU. Ursula Quill, PhD student. Hazel Chu, Councillor and former Lord Mayor of Dublin. Paula Rosengrave, psychologist. Abba Ali O'Shea, minority community representative and consultant. Owen Barry, social worker and family therapist. Tom Clonan, academic and journalist. And Michael McDermott, PhD student. I'm now going to put the first of our 3 questions to the candidates. Each of you will have 2 minutes to answer the question. Ellen, our timekeeper over here, where's Ellen? There she is. She's going to ring a bell at 1 minute 30 seconds to let you know that you have 30 seconds left. At 2 minutes, she will ring the bell again, and at that point, you must stop talking. So here's the first question. The government recently announced it would consider reducing student fees. If you are elected Senator for Trinity College, would you consider it more important to reduce fees or increase government spending on higher education? Sive O'Neill.
Thank you, Ursula. Well, first of all, I don't accept the question. I don't think we have to choose between a decent funding for higher education or a decent living for students. Now, despite being a rich country, Ireland's investment in higher education falls way below. In fact, it's the bottom of the European League. And I'd go further to say that we need to double the state's investment in higher education, lower fees ideally to zero, increase the SUSI grant and double the funding for postgraduate scholarships. And that's what Funding the Future demands. But tying funding and fees together is a false choice. And it's exactly what Minister Simon Harris has done. He has had the nerve to say to the Dáil this week that he's not prepared to give new money for old rope, that no extra funding would come for either higher education institutions or student grants without reforms. Now, if we're serious about equality in education, we have to look at who in society gets the opportunity to go to third level and who doesn't get the opportunity to go. In some parts of Dublin, it's 94%, and in other parts, it's as low as 22%. And this is entrenched inequality. And it's not just about the financial barriers. Poor public transport connectivity and other even psychological barriers make it harder for the poorest students. And that applies at the postgraduate level too. So I support increasing the funding to the IRC for more scholarships and that all stipends should be pegged at least the living wage. And there's no need for the Irish system to be so miserable unless the government is seriously trying to stop Ireland's future leaders and innovators from acquiring the skills that we in society need. Universities and higher education will be the cornerstone of the innovation and the socio-political transformations we need to become a zero-carbon country.
Thank you, Sive. Now we'll move on to Ursula.
Gurmagad Ursula. As a PhD student here at Trinity College, I can see firsthand the impact of the costs on students of third-level education and also the impact of underfunding, both on colleagues and on friends. The underfunding of the higher education system will only be addressed by a fundamental shift in how higher education is valued in this country. Higher education is a public good, and publicly funded higher education benefits wider society and our economy. I support calls from the USI at the Oireachtas Committee of Education this week for both a reduction in the student contribution charge and for a publicly funded higher education system. A clear way in which the underfunding of our higher education system manifests itself is in the student-staff ratios, which are at 23:1, far out of line of the OECD average of 15:1. That impacts both on student learning and also is a huge pressure on teaching staff. This underfunding of the system, it means that our institutions are overly reliant on casual labour and precarious staff. Rates of precarious employment in the sector are at an all-time high. 5 years have passed since the Castles report set out the issues very clearly regarding funding and the options for the sector. Yet we have yet to see a clear decision from government on a way forward, although I am glad to see that the government has parked the idea of the income contingent loan system. We need to move away from seeing higher education funding as a luxury. It is an investment in our future. And as we've seen over the past 2 years, researchers from this university in particular have contributed significantly to public understanding on issues such as public health, including from an interdisciplinary perspective. As we face into further challenges in digital, technological and environmental transitions, it is vital that our universities have the ability and autonomy to continue to contribute to public discourse. So as a university senator, I will fight for the sector and for publicly funded higher education.
Thank you, Ursula. Hazel Chu.
Yep, I think our previous speakers have said already, it's not an either or that we're looking at. So it's not about just reducing fees or increasing spending, but why can it not be both? and it simply can be. There is, however, a limited amount of money going around. I've sat on university boards to know how tight spending can be and how we rely on commercial interest in investments. But that does need to stop, because commercial interest in sponsorship also creates an impact on the integrity of what is produced thereafter. So the funding does have to come in terms of reducing fees, but it also needs to increase spending within university. So, and this can be through multitude of ways, and how a university inputs into that is very clear in terms of their board management system as well. Like, it's on every level. It's on a government level, it's on the university board level, and it's through how the students choose that the funding should go to as well. We mentioned here already postdoctoral and PhD students. There is no reason why postdoctoral and PhD students cannot be provided a living wage and workers' rights. They are workers. They are not just students. And that is something that we need to change to make sure that proper service is provided towards students. I think when we look at the likes of some wonderful students that have come out of Trinity, if we provide the same model these days, you wouldn't have Ernest Walton still hanging around. And this comes with the impact of creativity if you don't provide proper funding. And that is a call to the government that I've made several times and will continue to knock on that door.
Thank you, Hazel. Paula Rosengrave.
Thank you. Having been an academic, I can say we need to do both. We need to return government funding back to where it was before austerity. I think Trinity gets around 40% of funding from the government. When that happens, it means that universities rely on outside funding from foreign investment. As you can see from UCD, the debacle that is occurring there as a result of the Chinese investment and the association with human rights abuses. In terms of funding also, you need to cover the costs for students from disadvantaged backgrounds or with a disability like mine. The Access Dare Here programmes are absolutely essential for students coming in with any particular issue. Ensuring gender equality in third level, the gender pay gap, women's advancement and their security and their safety. It doesn't come cheap. As regard to reduction of fees, every young person in Ireland, I believe, should be entitled to third level education, and this needs to be embedded in the Constitution. The benefits of how students go back into the world, going beyond the information given. We know from the demographics of Trump, many of his followers did not have third-level education. It's much easier to see how those kind of people will end up going down rabbit holes and into echo chambers. That is one very important part of what we give to students when we give them third-level education. And it's not just about reduction in fees. It's also about support for accommodation too, which is causing a huge barrier to those who are going to go into third-level education and for their families. Bottom line, higher education acts at the front line for research, innovation, good teaching, and very informed participatory students in society and life more generally.
Thank you, Paula. Abbas Ali O'Shea.
Thank you. I think they're both important. However, reducing fees should be a priority. Ideally, education should be free, removing one of the barriers to entry. It is a capital investment in Ireland, as our education system is one of our greatest resources. An increase in government spending could go towards grants for students and supporting subsidized housing for students. There should also be an investment in promoting science and technology to attract undergraduates into these areas, to feed innovation and provide suitable graduates for these businesses. In particular, we need to work on attracting more women on these subjects. Thank you.
Thank you, Abbas. Owen Barry.
Thanks very much. Much like the rest of the speakers, I don't really see this as a choice that anybody that's running for this position would make. I think both need to happen. So the way I look at it is that for students and for academics working and for PhD workers, the current system, it isn't working for them. There's already a cost built into the problem at the moment. So everybody has a cost. At the moment, the cost is that the lifestyle that PhD workers are going through means most of them are working an extra job, or most of them are working far beyond the hours that, if they were recognised as workers, that they'd legally be allowed to do. For students, they're under huge pressure because there's a housing crisis going on. There's also a cost of living crisis going on, which is rapidly increasing because of the war in Ukraine. So students are now under huge pressure, to get a house and then to live and then to study on top of that. So the way I look at it is that there is already a cost. We just haven't recognized that there is a cost. So it's the emotional and physical cost on students is not sustainable. And for academics working in this college, there's huge pressure. There's pressure for researchers to constantly keep up, and there's pressure on them, constant pressure being added to people. So essentially what's happening is we're not funding third level properly, but we're squeezing everybody that's involved in it, everybody that's working in it. And as a psychotherapist, I've worked with students in some of the universities in Ireland, and I can see the pressure they're under, and that pressure isn't sustainable. So we can talk about the cost financially, or we can talk about the other costs, and it's the other cost I would prioritise.
Thank you, Owen. Tom Clonan.
Good evening, everybody. This is my third time, hopefully third time lucky, attempting to get a seat on the Trinity panel. Look, spending on third level education, we're the lowest in Europe. It needs to increase. The National Strategy for Higher Education, the Hunt report, says that our universities, our third level sector, should be the engine of Ireland's economic recovery through innovation, research. I believe our universities should be the engine of Ireland's ethical recovery and our social recovery, because as a society, we are in big trouble. And these are issues I'll address in the next question. But to be the engines of ethical recovery and to hold those in power to account and to challenge the establishment, we have to have a fully independent, what we call provocative professoriate, who can speak independently. Reliance on corporate sponsorship and endowments and donations from business, whilst a good thing in and of itself, threatens to undermine the academic and intellectual independence, the freedom of expression of our professoriate. I have direct experience of this. When my PhD was published, I was threatened with criminal prosecution. And it's only now, 20 years later, when I speak about sexual violence and violence against women, that I get the support of the university sector. And I'm proud to say I'm involved in the Higher Education Authority task force on ending sexual violence and harassment throughout our university sector. With regard to fees, I believe in the German model. There should be no fees, no tuition fees for our publicly funded universities. And of course, that will require investment. But people like me, I'm from Finglas, wouldn't have gone to university. And there are so many people like me who couldn't have gone on to engage in the public service that we have without that opportunity. And one of the major barriers is cost. Finally, last year I achieved a great victory for people with disabilities to get them the supports and packages they need at third level. Put me in the Senate, watch what I'll do there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Michael McDermott.
Well, as they say in the old El Paso ads, which is where I get most of my political philosophy, why don't we have both? The two things aren't independent, obviously, because if you reduce fees, that becomes a shortfall in the university's income, which has to be made up somewhere. To ask that question is similar to asking, is it more important to flush the toilet afterwards or wash your hands? You could have a discussion about which one is more important, but I think we should strive to do both at the same time. We need to have it be available for everyone, regardless of their background, to avail of higher and further education. And we also need to make it an education that's worth having, because I believe education is an investment in our future. We will need a skilled workforce for the future economy, which I believe will mainly consist of data centers in which the consciousness of billionaires will be stored until they can be transferred to a new host body. These data centers will probably be the only source of warmth after the Gulf Stream collapses, so they're very important to maintain. Ireland has fallen well behind the rest of the world. At one point, our college, the University of Dublin, was ranked in the top 50 in the world. We are now outside of the top 5,000, ranked just 8,635th alphabetically. And we can do better. Changing to Dublin University or College of Dublin would shoot us well above UCD. But we also have to be careful about where we're actually spending this money. The building we're sitting in right now cost 80 million euros to build. I probably could have got it done for 10.
Thank you, Michael. Now I'll move on to the second question. And the second question is, if you are elected senator, what national issue will be your first priority to address in the Seanad and why? Sive O'Neill.
Thank you. The war in Ukraine, it's a fossil fuel war. And guess who the winners are right now? The fossil fuel industry and petrostates. According to the Financial Times, the boss of BP, British Petroleum, said high commodity prices had turned his company into a cash machine. And this is resulting in extraordinary and unearned windfall profits. The same companies now want to use the crisis to justify more exploration and drilling and more climate change. So my first priority, if elected, will be to propose the introduction of a carbon levy for energy companies that are making windfall profits from the fuel crisis. There is a precedent. We had a banking crisis and we imposed a banking levy. There's already a NORA levy, it's the National Oil Reserves Agency, and the Minister would just need to increase the levy. Now, I'm aware that the Seanad can't propose money bills, and I'm also aware that energy prices are likely to remain high. There's no quick fix. But I'm an experienced campaigner, and I know how to forge coalitions in support of legislative reform because I've already done it with Stop Climate Chaos to get the 2021 climate law passed. So what could we do with the revenues? We could direct the revenues into doubling the fuel allowance and other supports for people at risk of fuel poverty. We could install 250,000 solar roofs within a year. And furthermore, I think no state-owned company should be permitted to make a profit for the next 2 years. The ESB made 500 million, in fact more than 500 million in profits last year, and only 126 million of this went back to the Exchequer. Now, none of this is going to fix the cost of living crisis, but the question was about my priorities. We're heading into very uncertain and insecure times, and food and energy prices are likely to keep rising and stay high. But fossil fuel companies must not be allowed to profit from this crisis.
Thank you, Sive. Ursula.
Ursula. While there are many vital issues that I hope to address if elected on climate and biodiversity, on north-south issues, on the sustainability of the arts, my first priority will be to address the challenges that face young people in this country. Too many people, particularly of my own generation, feel our lives are on hold as we struggle to find a place to rent, let alone having a place we can call our own home. Young people have led the way in societal change in this country and in calling for action on climate. We believe in a better future, and yet we are being let down in such a way that it is difficult to make ends meet, let alone plan for our own future. We want to be part of intergenerational and sustainable communities. We want to have a sense of belonging. This week we marked International Women's Day, and while there is much to celebrate, we could say that this really is no country for young women. Recent events in Ireland are a reminder that we need to consistently work for a society free from gender-based violence. The recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly on gender equality highlight the many existing inequalities that still exist and need to be seriously considered by the Oireachtas. We want to flourish, contribute to society, and live our best lives, and yet we are being held back by the serious barriers that we face. The past 2 years have shown us different ways of working that have been really welcomed by families, and I want to see a right to flexible work that takes account of a work-life balance. The cost of childcare, not to mention the availability of childcare places, is a massive obstacle for young families. We need to fundamentally rethink childcare in this country and improve the quality of early years education. I will be proactive as Senator in addressing these issues, listening to researchers in our universities and advocates in civil society who are telling us the alternative models that exist.
Thank you, Ursula. Hazel.
I don't think any of us are single-issue candidates, nor can we be single-issue senators when we go in there, but there is a very particular issue that is tied into everything else, housing. So getting housing right in this country is an action on climate change. Building the right type of housing and ZEB buildings to reduce to higher efficiency and lower energy costs would mean better communities. This is climate action as well as addressing homelessness. And I would love to stand here and theorise with you about principles of housing, but it's about action. I was the first Lord Mayor to ever create a homeless task force for the city. I was the first Lord Mayor to look at strategic housing within the city and look at the policies that we can build and build better. Practical levels of what we can do is what needs to be done within the Seanad. And people go, well, it's the Senate. Can you really do that much when it comes to practical issues? Look at the vacant and derelict sites legislation. That is one of the key things we need amendments on immediately, because it's so vague right now that local authorities can skirt around it and not provide a fit-for-purpose register, which is something I proposed that we needed to change on a local authority level. But they argued that it needed to be changed on a national level. So here I am going in to change it on a national level. It needs to be amended so that it is watertight and there is no loopholes, and we can provide for sustainable housing then through vacant and derelict sites. We can also provide for sustainable housing through colleges getting seed capital from government to build their own approved housing bodies with students. Getting housing right is fighting climate change. Getting housing right is fighting poverty. Getting housing right is an action for better education. And getting housing right is what we need to do right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Paula.
I'm going to wear my psychology hat to answer this one, and there won't be one. Since the pandemic, we have woken up to a number of co-corresponding and interrelating crises here in Ireland and beyond. Housing, rent, health, mental health, employment, childcare, women's safety and security, and of course the ever-looming environmental climate emergency. You only have to look at last week's IPCC report to see that. And of course the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. Day one, a plan to prioritise the most immediate responses: Ukraine, climate, health and mental health, and to assess how we reduce the effect of one upon the other. As regards health, we need to introduce Sláinte Care now. Mental health, roll out a step-up programme like IAPT in the UK, which is locally accessible and therapies individually dependent on the mental health issue that's presenting. As regards the environment, continuing the reduction in greenhouse gases nationally to get it down to 1.5 degrees centigrade globally, increase all our efforts to reduce biodiversity loss, woodland, marine and river destruction, pollution, and a just transition. In other words, changing to a green economy affordable for all.
Thank you, Paula. Abbas.
The housing crisis and housing security will be my first priority in the Seanad because it's such a fundamental issue and has such wide impact across so many sectors. The right to housing and the housing security impact two of my core priorities, namely education and immigration. For students, it is essential to have affordable and secure housing to allow them to complete their studies. For immigrants fleeing unstable regions, finding a safe and secure place to stay and rebuild their lives is my priority. Unfortunately, in the current climate, once immigrants make it through direct provision, they often find themselves unable to find anywhere to move to. This in turn affects their ability to earn a living and integrate successfully. Furthermore, the availability of affordable housing has a direct effect on Ireland's ability to attract foreign direct investment. International companies will not continue to be based in Ireland if there is no suitable housing for employees. I use the term housing security to highlight the fact that even when properties can be found, they are often below par. The housing crisis needs to be addressed head-on by the government. More public housing needs to be built and managed by the government. The last few decades have shown us that we can no longer outsource the provision of housing to private landlords. Likewise, building large amounts of short-term rent-only properties is not a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Abbas. Owen.
My number one priority, if I was elected, is on the issue of mental health and in the broader issue of the quality of life that people have. In mental health services, those of us that work in CAMS would have seen the report in Kerry, and the whole country was shocked by what happened in Kerry. Everybody that was shocked didn't work in CAMS. People who worked in CAMS weren't surprised at all. One of the issues with CAMS is we are currently operating between about 30 to 50% of staffing levels. The other issue is the overall policy framework that mental health services operate in. Far too many people that seek help are told no. So when we read the papers, we talk about waiting lists, but there's another list. There's a list of people that are told no when they seek help. One of the priorities I would have is that all of the services that are funded by the government, so whether it's Jigsaw or whether it's Pieta House or whether it's any service, including in college here, that they all operate under one referral pathway, so that if you're under 18, you're guaranteed to get some therapy and some support. And if you're over 18, that you would also get some therapy, the correct therapy for people. And that isn't always specialist services like CAMS, but it is, input is always required. In the broader society issue, people need to have access to the environment, they need to have access to a living wage, and they need to have access to a community in their area. All of those things tackle the overall mental health. People need to feel that they aren't as isolated as they currently feel. They're my priorities in this election. So my main issue is mental health, but as Hazel pointed out, those problems interconnect with other issues.
Thank you, Owen. Tom.
Housing, shelter, is a UN fundamental human right. It is also a fundamental human necessity. It's a functional prerequisite for life, for a meaningful, self-actualised life. To have a house or a home in Ireland, in Dublin, as a single person, you have to be amongst the top 3% of earners in the European Union. As a couple, you must be in the top 5%. So 95% of our young people are excluded from having a home or a house of their own. That is the very definition of a dysfunctional society. Now, I have a very selfish motivation in this, and this is why it's my priority. My son, Owen, who's 20, has a neuromuscular disease. He's a wheelchair user. He's now in 3rd level. We have no idea where his future lies. I have asked the Minister with responsibility for disabilities in this administration and in the last, where will he live? How will he live when I die? And I'll tell you what the answer is. At the moment, there are 2,000 young adults in nursing homes. Young adults with disabilities, physical disabilities, some of them acquired brain injuries, some of them disabilities. And typically what happens when the parent or the carer dies, they go into crisis, and we don't have the housing solutions for them. We don't have supported living solutions. We don't have the care packages. We don't have anything. And as a consequence, my son and people like him face this future. And as we speak tonight, there are thousands of people like that out in that gulag archipelago that exists, this parallel society. The other thing that I would prioritise is to end the commodification of public goods, as Ursula said, like 3rd level education, like health, like housing. We've been on that political trajectory now since the 90s, and it has brought nothing but suffering, waiting lists, and dysfunction to our society. And if elected, I will vote against every single act or amendment that empowers or propels that trajectory.
Thank you, Tom. Michael.
As an avid user of social media, one of the things that keeps me up at night is Ireland's defamation laws. They have a chilling effect on the freedom of speech. They prevent criticism of public figures or calling out of abusive individuals, as wealthy individuals can silence criticism with merely the threat of litigation. I will advocate for the reform of our defamation laws and also use my Oireachtas privilege to slander without the threat of legal action against me. People can send me what they want to say but can't say themselves, and I'll just repeat it. I haven't seen the television show Gossip Girl, but I think it's basically the same concept. So if you would like to know what endangered species Irish oligarchs such as Dennis O'Brien allegedly have eaten, in one bite, they unhooked their jaws like a boa constrictor, allegedly. You'll have to elect me first.
Thank you, Michael. Well, now we're on to our 3rd and final question for the first part of our hustings. And that question is this. 2 weeks ago, Russia invaded Ukraine. We have seen many countries and organisations respond in various ways. How do you think Ireland could further respond to this invasion? Sive O'Neill.
I think the news over the past few weeks has been devastating for everybody, to have to be a spectator to this cascading series of violent acts against Ukraine. Now, what can we do about it? It's a very big discussion. It's a long conversation. We can certainly ramp up measures immediately to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, to ease the EU's reliance on Russian oil and gas. And this is an issue that I'm passionate about in respect of climate change and protecting biodiversity. But in terms of the question, what can we do now about this crisis? I think we need to tap deeply into our history and our legacy of humanitarian assistance. Our focus should be on assisting the refugees. There's 2 million of them, at least, on the march across Europe. They're mostly women and children and elderly people. They're separated from their homes, their belongings, their families. They're terrified. They're traumatised. And what they need is assistance, direct assistance. So I think we should get as many of them as possible into our communities. We need to provide support, assistance, language help, events, entertainment. A lot of them are young people who aren't able to go to school, they're separated from their friends. And we need to provide them with a welcome that we know we can offer. There's 12,000 households have offered pledges already. But the reality is we could be doing a lot more. During the pandemic, we sent aircraft over to China, 5 planes a day for 3 months to get masks. Why can't we send planes to get refugees from the Polish border? This is what we're good at. We should figure out how to use what we're good at. The conversation about neutrality, about military spending, that needs to happen. But it isn't what's needed for us right now. We can step up straight away.
Thank you, Sive. Ursula.
Just at the outset to say how horrified I've been, like us all, over the past 2 weeks at the Russian invasion of Ukraine. To see the images yesterday of a maternity hospital in Mariupol being bombed with pregnant women being carried out on stretchers, 17 people injured, is absolutely heartbreaking. So it's vital that we continue and clearly condemn this reckless invasion, as I did with many others at the Russian embassy last week, while also standing clearly in solidarity with the Ukrainian people. We're witnessing the real human cost of war in those already killed and injured, and as I've mentioned, in the over 2 million people forced to flee Ukraine. And Irish people have already shown remarkable generosity, as is in our nature in the past 2 weeks, with the offers of accommodation for refugees fleeing the invasion that have been logged with the Red Cross, and €14 million already donated to the humanitarian appeal. As a board member of the IIEA, I was very proud to stand with other European citizens in solidarity with Ukraine at the Conference on the Future of Europe in Dublin last week. And I believe this is a real turning point for Europe and for Ireland's place in the world. It's more important than ever that we stand firmly for the democratic norms and principles of peace and the international rule-based system. Chair of the Elders, former President and of course former Senator for this university, Mary Robinson, this week called for a criminal tribunal to investigate Putin's alleged crimes of aggression. And it is of utmost importance that the UN call this invasion and war for what it is. The UN cannot be neutral in the face of this invasion. I was very proud that Trinity has been so clear in its condemnation of this invasion, and we shouldn't underestimate the role of universities in standing independently for peace and our democratic norms. And as a European University of Sanctuary, Trinity can provide real practical assistance to students and scholars affected. So the coming weeks and months, this conflict, we Irish people need to rise to the challenge with urgency and compassion.
Thank you, Ursula. Hazel.
I think that we need to break it down to short, medium and long term. So short term, we need to ensure that humanitarian corridors remain open and are respected, which they're currently not. So as Ireland has a seat on the UN Security Council, I think we need to use that effectively to ensure that, to push for the opening and staying open of such humanitarian corridors. medium term, get Russian coal and gas out of here. So, and our reliance on coal and gas needs to go. If it's not Russia, it's Qatar. If it's not Qatar, it's somewhere else. So we need to finally wake up to the fact that an investment in renewables is an investment in peace. We have to accelerate the change for renewables. We have to accelerate the change of how we provide efficiency in terms of renewables. That is doable. A lot of arguments have been made in the last couple of weeks of, oh no, Ireland can't scale up enough, or Ireland can't provide energy efficiency that way. We can. So once we have the ambition to. And that's something I've asked time and time again of our ministers. So packages that are going to Ukraine right now, the aid packages that we see going to Ukraine right now are massively dwarfed by what we give Russia every day in terms of fossil fuels. So we may be sending aid in one way, but we're also providing Russians with money as well. So, and in the longer term, I think we need to look at how inter-country we provide infrastructure or rebuilding of the infrastructure of war-torn countries like Ukraine. A simple example is inter-country adoption. So we know from the war zone from Bosnia and Kosovo that there are a lot of orphans, and facilitating inter-country adoption is going to be something we can seriously help with in the long term. And since the Ukraine hasn't signed the Hague Convention, we need to look at how we can remedy that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Paula.
Seen from the perspective of myself as a psychologist specialising in counselling, psychological trauma and political psychology, we are neutral militarily, but not politically. So providing humanitarian support right now will be our main response. This is a humanitarian emergency not seen since World War II. We need a wartime response with regard to organisation and funding. We need a management and coordination body. NEFIT comes to mind, with the responsibility for coordinating all agencies and services that we will offer, with very clear goals and responsibilities being adhered to avoid chaos. Firstly, Ukrainian refugees will need a needs assessment in the following areas. Safety, they need secure accommodation. Access to other refugees to provide psychological support and comfort. They will need a lot of trauma psychological care from healthcare professionals. They will need schooling for children, but I suggest on a phased basis so as not to overwhelm. There needs to be time to process the grief and the trauma that these children are experiencing. They will need help with cultural and social integration so we can understand them and they can understand us. They will need training and work to become independent. And finally, continuous access to mobile phones and other technology to keep in touch with loved ones fighting in Ukraine. Their daily lives will be focused on their fears for their loved ones. When this war ends, which I pray it does soon, we need a universal conversation about the major world powers and their adherence to the doctrine of realpolitik. Humans slaughtering other human beings cannot go on.
Thank you, Paula. Abbas.
Ireland is already responding very well to the crisis and showing their support for the people of Ukraine by actively opening Ireland to receive and assist Ukrainians displaced by the conflict. However, I do believe further effort can be made by Ireland and the international community to engage in diplomacy and attempt to open diplomatic channels with Russia. Unfortunately, so far, I have seen quite inflammatory language used on both sides, which will only serve to escalate the conflict. Ireland is uniquely positioned as a neutral country in Europe who is not a member of NATO and hold a seat on the UN Security Council. As a part of our role on the Security Council, Ireland has a duty to build peace and prevent conflict. Ireland has a rich history to draw on of taking a key peacekeeping role in the many conflicts in Africa, Middle East, and around the world. This history gives Ireland the respect internationally to take a lead in diplomatic effort with Russia. Growing up during the invasion of Iraq, I have seen firsthand the devastation war brings and can see on benefit to anything other than diplomatic solution being reached. The media polarizes the issues without discussing the full background of how it's reached this point. In the meantime, it's normally people who are suffering and pay the cost of the war, which will have far-reaching impact on their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abbas. Owen.
Thank you. Well, I'm reminded when I hear about Ukraine and the help that we should offer about a lesson I learned when I worked with Focus Ireland in homeless services. And when we were trained, one of the principles we worked under was nothing about me without me, which was the idea being that we don't provide services to people, we provide services with people, that we ask people what they want. I think the first priority with Ukrainians is to ask Ukrainians what they're looking for when they arrive in Ireland. Many of them are highly educated. Many of them might just want a job. I think before we offer, it isn't a paternalistic type of support that they need. They need to be worked. It's about working with people and working with community leaders. I think Paula's point about the trauma that people experience, I think that's a very important point. There's a particular trauma that happens for families when their loved ones are in war. So 2 million people have left Kiev in the last few weeks. That means 2 million people are still there, and the family members are often in other parts of Europe. That causes a particular type of trauma. It's the trauma of not knowing what happens to families. The same thing happened after 9/11, where families didn't know about their family members. So children don't really understand what's going on for their parents in that situation. It's extremely traumatic. So thankfully the Red Cross has offered people that have that particular training that we can offer our time, which is great. But it will need more than that, because the numbers coming in is going to require a lot more of that kind of work. So there needs to be training provided in particular trauma approaches. I think on the broader international piece, I believe in diplomacy and the importance of keeping open diplomatic channels. So I don't agree with expelling the Russian ambassador, even though I would actually quite enjoy seeing him going. But I believe that we should, Russians that live here that have nothing to do with the war should be able to get access support, and Irish people living in Moscow should be able to get support from our own diplomats. I also believe in protecting embassies around the world, because Irish diplomats need that to keep safe.
Thank you, Owen. Tom.
This is a very dangerous moment for Europe, for Ukraine, for Russia, for the world. I served, I'm proud to have served internationally as a UN peacekeeper, as an army officer in Lebanon. And I was so proud when we went through the villages. The children would run out and hold our hands, and in their beautiful Arabic, welcome us, Sahlan wa Sahlan. And in the Operation Grapes of Wrath of 1996, I witnessed at first hand the slaughter of those children and their parents and their grandparents, wholesale butchery. And that's what's happening in Ukraine. That's the story. It's not about weapon systems or no-fly zones. It's about the innocent men, women, and children. And that's why millions are on the move. And that's why millions are on the move from Yemen, from Syria, from Iraq. That's why they're putting their children into rubber dinghies, not to get a job in Starbucks in Hanover. They're running for their lives. And we need to open our hearts and our minds to all of our brothers and sisters. One last thing. The risk of escalation in Ukraine. I've been writing about this for the last couple of weeks in the Journal, and I've been doing interviews all around the world, the BBC and elsewhere. The risk of escalation to a conventional intercontinental ballistic missile exchange is very, very high. The last thing we need is escalation, and we do not need Irish politicians devaluing our neutrality. We must not join a military alliance. We must use the moral authority that our neutrality gives us to speak to our brothers and sisters in Russia. And I would agree, keep the Russian ambassador here, keep the lines of communication open, talk to our Russian friends and neighbours, help to get the word out. This is not the time to talk about escalation, because believe me, what could happen next could not only be catastrophic for Europe, it could be apocalyptic. And we must be mindful of that and use Ireland's moral authority at the UN Security Council to begin to de-escalate and to talk, to work behind the scenes like we did for the strategic arms limitation talks. And that's the power of peace and the power of our neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Michael.
In terms of concrete actions we can take, we should continue with and expand the humanitarian aid and accepting refugees from Ukraine. And that should be always the case in these kind of situations. They should be treated well, which is why the system of direct provision has to be abolished, because it's cruel and inhumane. On a global level, I would agree with expelling the Russian ambassador and also joining in sanctions on the Russian government and their allies. One thing that I don't think is discussed enough is the kind of rising level of xenophobia against the regular Russian citizenry who aren't responsible for the actions of their government and in many cases are protesting it. I mean, we wouldn't like it if, all of Ireland was blamed whenever U2 release a new album. There have been calls from people in the media and our own government to rethink our position on our neutrality, which is, I think, antithetical to our national identity. We've already seemed to have lost Tato Park, and people are already trying to turn it into NATO Park. It's just not our place to join an alliance like that, because we might as well try and join something like OPEC or the Bermuda Triangle, which I guess would then be the Bermuda Quadrilateral. Little Mix is also down in members, so we could try and get in there, but I don't think it's our place. And even if we started increasing our military spending on the level of other NATO countries, how would we do it? I mean, look at what we've done with the HSE. If we treated our military like the HSE, there wouldn't be enough helmets for everyone. Soldiers wouldn't be paid while they're training, and there'd be about 10 generals for every infantryman.
Thank you, Michael. Well, that's the last of our 3 questions. You're nearly finished, but not quite. Each one of you now has 1 minute to make a final pitch for yourselves. Tell us, why should anyone vote for you? Starting with Sive.
Long before Ireland became independent, our forebears set up the world's first agricultural co-ops, the GAA. They set up a land reform and political movement that spanned continents and a cultural revival. They imagined a free and equal society in which all the children were cherished. And I have a vision for Ireland's future too. The infrastructure that we will build in the 21st century won't be roads and bridges. They will be forests and floodplains. We're going to build railways, large-scale ecological restoration projects, tens of thousands of timber-framed houses, new ecological communities, eco-villages, all built around renewables, agroecology and green hydrogen. Now, if that sounds mad, just read the literature, read the science. We will build a shared and circular economy because there is no alternative. Now, my vision is for a just and sustainable society, and I've been working for this for 30 years in elected politics, outside, and hopefully in the Seanad.
Thank you, Sive. Ursula.
Ursula. All of us on this stage recognise the many crises that we face. And this evening, I hope I've given a flavour of how I would address some of the pressing issues of our time. So many of these crises seem intractable, but I believe that there are solutions available to us if only the political will can be found. Democracy is not something we can take for granted, as we've learned in the past 2 weeks. We need to value and work for democracy. Having worked for 7 years in the Seanad and now as a researcher at the School of Law here in Trinity College on deliberative democracy, I have the experience and understanding to bring about real political solutions to these challenges. I've worked on successful pieces of legislation on equality, on workers' rights, and on campaigns for constitutional reform. I know that change is possible. If elected, I will get to work on the issues I've addressed this evening and on so many more. Tá fís agus fuinne vagam, donning lech le ceiste móra ar linne. If elected, I will listen to citizens, listen to the experts, and represent Trinity College in the Seanad. Gurad Míle Maithí.
Thank you, Ursula. Hazel.
Well, firstly, folks, thank you for coming tonight. This seat has been empty for 8.5 months now. 8.5 months where we didn't have a senator fighting for Trinity, fighting for the public. So very practically, on my part, I have had decades of experience in housing, in climate action, in inclusion, in health. I've helped build legislation and I've rolled up my sleeves to see this city through the worst crisis of our time. I will hit the ground running. I have worked with ministerial departments. I have worked with opposition leaders and parties. I will make sure we will get the job done, because there's not a lot of time left for this seat either. If the government sees through its full term, it's 2.5 years. And it's 2.5 years for a senator to get in there to understand how legislation and how policies work and how to build those relationships, which I have. And I will make sure to represent Trinity and the public immediately and not in 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Paula.
Fellow graduates, ladies and gentlemen, we are at an incredibly difficult moment in Irish and global history. In Ireland, we have a number of co-corresponding crises, as I've already outlined, from women's safety and gender equality to the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. I believe my extensive experience as a psychologist in the areas of academia, health, mental health, rehabilitation, psychological trauma, and more laterally, political and environmental psychology make me an excellent candidate because of the unique experience and skill I can bring to each individual crisis we are now experiencing. This is what I do. This is who I am. I've got this. Give me the chance to work for you, Trinity graduates, and the people of Ireland as a senator in Seanad Bye-Election. I promise you now, I won't let you down. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Abbas.
Thank you. I grew up in an actively political house in Iraq, and I witnessed the American invasion and the ensuing devastation. I can really empathize with the Ukrainian-Russian conflict and the long-term impact of such a destabilization. I intend, if elected, to repledge half of my Seanad salary to the Irish Red Cross. I would hope that this money could go some way toward assisting refugees in Ukraine and other regions. My core motivation is to provide greatest representation of minorities in the Seanad and to give a different perspective on issues currently affecting all our society. The pandemic has highlighted housing insecurity as well as domestic violence and the discrimination against women and minority groups. I really believe Irish education is well received internationally. However, it's quite a low profile compared to UK and US. I have used my network in Gulf countries to facilitate signing a number of agreements between Irish institutions and organizations in Qatar, Oman, Kuwait.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Abbas. Owen.
In my impression of the Senate is that it works best when people are clear on their values and what they stand for, and also how they bring about change. My experience is around systemic change. I'm a social worker, I'm a family therapist, and both professions work on systems, how systems operate and how systems change. I think at the moment, our senators in Trinity and the history of Trinity senators has been people that were able to bring about very important change in society. David Norris is an incredible politician in Ireland, but throughout the history, same with Lynn Ruane, incredible person. But in my impression, is my background, I come from a rural part of Ireland, which is different than a lot of people actually in the Senate. And in rural Ireland, we see some of these problems, the problems with the environmental issues, the problems with mental health, the problems with the cost of living crisis. Those are very real problems at the moment. But as in the Senate, in comparison to the TDs, so during the week you saw the TDs talking about short-term issues with the rise of fuel. In the Senate, we can talk about long-term systemic change. That's the kind of change I want.
Thanks, Owen. Tom.
So, fellow graduates, I came to Trinity from Finglas in 1984 and became a member of this most privileged community in Ireland. And I'll say something about that when I close. I have proven positive impacts in the area of gender-based violence for the work I did as an army officer in ending systematic and systemic sexual harassment, sexual violence, sexual assault and rape of my female colleagues, my sisters in arms. I have fought for 25 years in that space and now continue that work on the Higher Education Authority's Task Force on Sexual Harassment and Bullying. I have also worked for 20 years advocating for young persons with disabilities, as chairman of Dogs for the Disabled, as a parent and a carer, and I have brought about measurable positive impacts. So please, look at my track record. It is who I am and is what I would bring to the Senate. But finally, we are the most privileged group in Irish society. 70,000 graduates registered to vote. Shockingly, 55,000 of us did not vote. So I would say, vote for Hugo, vote for Cy, vote for Hazel, vote for Ursula. Everybody here, without exception, is an exceptional candidate. But please use your vote, and please, of course, vote Tom Clonan number 1. Your independent, non-party candidate.
Thank you, Tom. Michael.
Maybe one exception. Apart from slander and libel, my passion is also to help improve the living standards of PhD students. As a PhD student, if elected to the Seanad, my standard of living will go up exponentially. So I'll already have fulfilled one of my promises. And realistically, that's all I can promise in good faith. Other than that, I think all you can do as a Seanator is raise awareness of issues. Because unless you're in a government party, you can't really get legislation passed. And if you're in a government party, coalitions have gone on for 2 years. They're probably not going to get around to it at this stage. It doesn't even work as a check on the powers of the Dáil. The Taoiseach appoints twice as many seats directly as the few people in Ireland, of the Irish public, who are eligible to actually vote for a seat. And they usually get filled with people who are failed candidates for TDs. So effectively what that makes the Seanad is, it's like the Dáil, fewer seats, but more arseholes sitting on them. So you probably shouldn't elect me, but I'm at least an alternative to spoiling your vote.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to all our candidates. We're at the end of the first part of the hustings. Please show your appreciation for all our candidates. We're now going to take a 15-minute break in part 2. I'll introduce you to the second panel. So see you back here at 8:20 sharp. See you then. Welcome back to part 2 of the hustings for the University of Dublin, Trinity College Seanad Bye-Election. The format will be exactly the same in the first part. I will begin by introducing the candidates to you and asking you to hold your applause until all the candidates have been introduced. So, starting from my left to right, we have Ade Ulubarode, barrister at the Bar of Ireland. Giselle Scanlon, President of Trinity Graduate Students' Union, writer and researcher. Ryan Alberto Ogiboon, PhD researcher in educational inequalities and policy. Aubrey McCarthy, founder of Tiglin and entrepreneur. Patricia McKenna, barrister and former member of the European Parliament. Maureen Gaffney, psychologist and director of Trinity's doctoral programme in applied psychology. Hugo McNeill, ambassador for the Trinity Centre for People with Intellectual Disabilities and chairman of the British Irish Association. Catherine Stocker, public representative. And there is one additional candidate standing in this election who unfortunately could not be here with us tonight, and that is the former diplomat and ambassador Ray Bassett. So I'm going to start by putting the first of our 3 questions to the candidates. Each of you will have 2 minutes to answer the question. Ushing here on my right, our timekeeper will ring a bell at 1 minute 30 seconds to let you know that you have 30 seconds left. At 2 minutes, he will ring the bell again, and at that point, you must stop talking. So here's your first question. Trinity senators have a reputation for reflecting the university's values of equality. Which area or areas of equality will you focus on to improve access to education for all? Ade Olubarode.
Thank you. I have 4 points. The first one, People from low socioeconomic backgrounds are grossly underrepresented when it comes to university attendance. The ratio is 2-1 in favor of well-off families. My watchword is to hold no one back while leaving no one behind. If elected, I will work to expand equality of access for people whose life chances are compromised by diverse spectrum of disadvantage, be it disabilities or membership of minority communities. Secondly, I will support funding policies that give second chances to mature students and to those with family responsibilities, but who need to return to education to escape the hold of poorly paid jobs. Thirdly, I would like to remind my audience today that not all university qualifications are equal. Education is not an end in itself. Rather, the expected end of education is access to high-quality vocation. Irish University needs to boost the employability of its graduates as well as the reputation of the employers. If elected, I will strategically work with stakeholders so that we can invest to improve the faculty-student ratio, improve quality of student research, partner with selected Fortune 500 companies so that our students, our graduates can access top-level employment. I tell you, equality of access to top employment is the litmus test of equality of access to education.
Thank you, Ade. Giselle.
I've worked at the Graduate Students' Union as the Vice President. I was an Education and Welfare Officer. I worked as a President, and I worked right through the pandemic. I have lived the pandemic with Trinity. I've lived the pandemic with the Trinity community. I know firsthand that young people from poor families, young people with physical and hidden disabilities, young people needing special accommodations, young parents and mature students are underrepresented in higher education. This risks exposing them to a life sentence of reduced earnings, inequality among social groups, and it undermines the foundations of wider economic growth in our country and what Trinity stands for. There's a greater number of disabled students in our community who don't even tell us, who don't even look for accommodation. 7.1% of the student population, the undergraduate student population, tell us that they have a disability. 2.4% of the postgraduate tell us they have a disability. The 2016 census, we're just about to do another one, showed the ever-increasing number of one-parent family household in Ireland, and 25.4% of families are led by a lone parent. CSO data from 2017 shows our disproportionate risk of being in poverty. I am currently challenging the HEA bill. The HEA bill, as far as I can see, has nothing at top level with regard to disability. I believe that inequality is about voice. I would like to see representation from every section of the equality spectrum represented at the top level. Those are the voices I want to listen to when I make decisions. Those are the voices that I will listen to in the Seanad to make legislation for you and for them.
Thank you, Giselle. Ryan.
Thank you. I believe that we need to focus on socioeconomic inequalities in education. We still have a situation where 75% of students in Trinity come from above average socioeconomic profiles, but only 5% of students in Trinity come from disadvantaged profiles. We have a situation where if you come from Dublin 6, you have a 99% chance of progressing to higher education, but if you come from Dublin 17, it's only a 15% progression rate. And we have a situation where even when you adjust for ability, these gaps are predicted by your socioeconomic profile. So these gaps have existed for a long time, but the recent pandemic and the school closures of the pandemic have actually worked in terms of widening these gaps. When schools were closed, not everyone had the same opportunity. And your household resources predicted how well you could succeed in this pandemic, whether you were able to access remote learning or not. And internationally, this has been recognized. In the Netherlands, a country that was viewed as having quite a good pandemic, and the schools were closed for only a few weeks, they have allocated €2,300 per student in catch-up learning initiatives. In Ireland, where our school closures were above the OECD average, we have allocated €92 per student in catch-up initiatives. And this is actually perhaps indicative of our priorities as a country so far. In fact, we have allocated more money to support the FAI, the IRFU, and the GAA in overcoming the pandemic effect than we have allocated to hundreds of thousands of students who are locked out of classrooms. And obviously, I'm running out of time here, but there are many ways we can affect change in this area, but we cannot neglect it. We need to do active, proactive, targeted policies to help these children regain lost learning.
Thank you, Ryan. Aubrey.
Thank you, Ursula. I've admired present and past Trinity senators who have taken a stand in the areas of equality, and I also believe that I have some record in this area, especially dealing with people from a disadvantaged socio-economic background. The charity that I founded is called Tiglin, and we have worked with men and women from all different backgrounds. A lot have experienced inequality regarding access to education, including myself. And last week, I was excited. I was tagged in a tweet by a guy who had been homeless for a number of years, and he lived on the streets. And I was volunteering in a homeless hostel, and I had met him and was able to get him housing and able to encourage him to access the supports through Tiglin for education. He tweeted last week about being on the Trinity Access programme and finishing his degree in social care, which is wonderful. And it means that people like him can have their lives, their worlds changed through accessing education. I'm not too sure if you saw the Tommy Tiernan show last week. Well, there was a lady on it called Jessica Wade, and she was talking about her life story. Jessica Wade spoke about a guy going into the prison and giving her information about rehabilitation and education, etc. Well, interestingly enough, that person was me. And Jessica has turned her life inside out. She's a wonderful lady who has shown me that education can change you. And so what I've done is I've partnered with colleges, partnered with the likes of An Cosán, and we have educational pathways that can be tailored to the individual. Jessica now works over the wall in our homeless cafe. And what it does show me is the likes of Einstein when he says, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll be useless for life. So education has to be tailored, and I believe high quality education is a solution to the global cycle of poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Aubrey. Patricia.
Thank you, Ursula. In relation to access to all to education, that means that we have to look at the barriers that are in place that people can't overcome to get into education. Now, people from, and as has already been said, people from disadvantaged backgrounds, working class, disadvantaged areas, also, for example, the travelling community and lone parents are all people who have huge problems in relation to access to third-level education. Now, as has already been said, in relation to the percentage of people from working class and poor disadvantaged areas, only about 20% of those people are likely to access third-level education, whereas about over 90% of people from affluent areas and well-off backgrounds are going to access third-level education. Now, one of the biggest problems, and it faces everyone, and this is one of the things I think needs to be tackled, because it doesn't just affect disadvantaged, but it affects everybody who's either at college at the moment or has children who are actually going to third-level education at the moment, and that is access to accommodation. It is completely unacceptable, the level or the prices of access to accommodation that is happening in this country. Now, we have a situation where accommodation remains one of the biggest hurdles, I would say, for a lot of people, particularly if they're from disadvantaged areas and also from rural areas, because that one coupled with the other makes it almost impossible for quite a lot of people from rural and disadvantaged areas to have access to third-level education because of the price of accommodation. We need to tackle that, and on this point, the government have allowed the developers to be able to build development with tax breaks. Now they have turned those student accommodations into accommodation for tourists. That is not acceptable. We need on-campus accommodation in our universities. We need to ensure that developers aren't making a profit at the so-called benefit of students when students can't even afford the accommodation that's been provided by the developers, and the developers are now moving to the tourist accommodation. That has to stop. We need on-campus accommodation for students.
Thank you, Patricia. Maureen.
Good evening, everybody. I'm here in Trinity, and I'm no stranger to the place. I got my PhD here in psychology, and I worked as the director of the very first programme at a doctoral level for clinical psychology for many years. But I'm back now in a different capacity. Equality, for me, has always been at the core of what I do. I was the daughter of a bus driver and a mother who had to leave school in her early teens to care for her own ailing mother. So equality, for me, has a personal resonance. And I know as well that equality is far from just an economic, a socio-economic phenomenon. My own mother was determined. She didn't know how she was going to do it, but she was determined that myself and my brother would get chances that we never got. And there are many, many families in disadvantaged areas who feel the same. I know when I worked in the RAPID programme, I visited families in the most deprived areas of this city and in other cities. And I was always touched by what those mothers and sometimes fathers, when I met them, said, is that they said, sure, I'd love my children to go to university, but what chance do we have? They didn't know the routes into university, and they were often at schools that had no tradition. And so there is many, many aspects to disadvantage, not least that psychological exclusion from privilege.
Thank you, Maureen. Hugo.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for all who are involved in putting this on this evening. Education is the great equaliser. I've had the immense privilege in the last few years to work with the Trinity Centre for People with Intellectual Disabilities, which takes people with disabilities into a 2-year structured programme, and then we work to place them in employment, transforming their lives, the lives of their families, and having a massive impact on the companies they go and work for. It was always assumed that people with intellectual disabilities couldn't go to college. Less than 1% are actually in college. Less than 5% get full-time employment. We must change this. We can change this. And we're so excited that we see a model that has worked. And I see some number of the people who are involved in the centre here this evening. Because our mission, and if I was elected as a senator, would be to take this model of Trinity and take it around the country and share it with other institutions so that we could actually transform the lives of so many of our fellow citizens. We had a mother who was commuting 3 days a week from Cork to bring her son up to the centre because she didn't have an alternative. So he was going to move to Portlaoise or Mullingar to be closer to Dublin. Well, that's not exactly close, but it's closer than what there was. And we've got a phenomenal response from the business community. We started 4 years ago with 4 of Ireland's major companies taking on students. Now we've got 40, and we've got great momentum. And they talk about their employees and the impact on those. And I'll share you a story about Tomás, my great friend Tomás, who, before he went and did the course, wouldn't leave the house. He goes and speaks in a conference in Washington on behalf of Trinity. He's at an event with Enda Kenny, who's just back as Taoiseach from Washington. And seeing Sheila, his mother, watching Tomás comparing notes about Washington with the Taoiseach, I thought she was going, and the Taoiseach telling about being in the White House with President Obama, I thought she was going to explode with pride. So behind each of those stories is a person. Behind each of those stories is a family. And if I was elected, I will help bring this system right across the country.
Thank you, Hugo. Catherine.
Thank you, Ursula. Having worked for several years in the Trinity Access programmes and on the higher education access route, Education and access to education is where both my passion and experience lie. Who receives education and at what level reflects our current society and shapes our future society. A higher education system which reflects a diverse society is vital if we are to provide quality education, quality research and a real positive impact on society. Equality benefits us all. The electoral register for this election tells a story of its own. There are 9 times as many Trinity graduates on the register from Foxrock as there are from Ballyfermot, despite roughly similar populations. This is improving, and Trinity has made huge strides in the past 2 decades and has led the way in the Irish university sector in terms of increasing diversity and access for students from areas of socioeconomic deprivation, students with disabilities and mature students. There are, however, changes we still need to make. We need to improve student grants and the income bands for those grants, and we need to tackle costs of living barriers such as accommodation mentioned earlier and others. We need to explore and implement reform of the CAO and admission systems, which still lead to disproportionate representation from private schools. The culture of higher education needs to shift to welcome students from diverse backgrounds rather than those students having to reshape their identities to fit in with the culture of the university. In terms of postgraduate and research work, existing systems are exclusionary. Where stipends exist, they are insufficient to meet the cost of living, but as a previous PhD student myself, I know that in many cases they simply do not exist. PhD students must be given appropriate workers' rights and a living wage. Without this, it is a route that is only available to those with financial support. So this too is an equality issue. Who gets to research influences what we research.
Thank you, Catherine. And now I'm going to move on to the second question. If you are elected to Seanad Bye-Election, how will you use your position as Senator to affect policy and progress at a national level? Ade.
Thank you. The main work of a senator is to scrutinize legislation and to hold the government accountable. As a practicing barrister, drafting legislation is my bread and butter. And this skills is very rare in the Seanad. However, drafting legislation is one thing, getting it passed is another. I will work with TDs, senators, and the civil servants to get legislation passed. In my professional work experience, which spans over 30 years, I have built teams, I have led teams, I have collaborated to get things done. My work in a government department involves working with expert groups and civil servants to develop legislation, to enact legislation, and to get them implemented. I also have personality and the skills, the soft skills that work very well with people. I never fail to hit the ground running. I never fail to deliver. But perhaps all these skills are important, but the uniqueness that I intend to bring to the Seanad is not just the diversity of my education or my profession, but it is the diversity of who I am and those that I represent. The saying is true, that there are no representations without us, that if we were not there. Therefore, I ask that I represent a significant section of our society that has no connection whatsoever to Irish ancestry. These are the people that I represent. I ask that it is time to make room for somebody like me in the Seanad. And there is no better time as the Ukrainians are coming in their thousands. What is better way to make them feel at home other than the announcement that I have won the Trinity Seanad election?
Thank you, Ade. Giselle.
I'm the daughter of a farmer and the daughter of a teacher. I watched my mother help children with disability in her own way when there weren't services around the country. I scribed here for the Disability Service and helped in disability with students that need that extra care. The Seanad is a place where we can actually influence legislation. When I go home to Kerry and when I go to my cousins in Cork, a real recovery needs to include the whole of the country. It needs to build from the base up, and we need to look at investment and how we can get that investment legislated. We need better public services, better health, better education, better housing, better social housing. But we're all going to beat that drum here tonight. We need to ensure that there's access to decent work and that every hour worked by every citizen in this country is actually remunerated. And I say that specifically for hours worked inside here. And I fought hard for the living wage this year and got a lot of motions passed with contracts, etc. in this direction. I have passion, I have fight, and I have vigour. I have 5 years' experience fighting at the coalface and, as I said, through COVID. I understand what building looks like. The Seanad it has a track record in delivering. It has a track record in debate and legislation. But we urgently need to reform that. And as a national house, it should represent all of us from every corner of the country. And I want to listen. I want to listen to every citizen, and I want to take every citizen's message and every citizen's voice and represent every Irish citizen in legislation and make sure that everybody is heard. People are letting and being kept out of the conversation and left behind. We need to consider everybody in legislation.
Thank you, Giselle. Ryan.
I believe that the Seanad and upper houses in general have something of a privilege in that they are able to take a more long-term strategic vision for the country that they represent. And in many ways, I feel this is where academia and politics should meet. Normally, in the lower houses, we're split between the opposition and the front benches of the government. And it's hard to get the research to the forefront of policy when people have to toe the party line and obey the party whip. But in the Seanad, independent voices are given the opportunity to advocate for policy-informed research, or research-informed policy. And we have the opportunity to speak out and not be afraid of breaking that party whip. In the Seanad, I would like to highlight issues and put forward policy solutions that are based on evidence, not just in educational inequality, which is my own research field, but evidence put forward by academics in different fields, because the research is being done there. The research on how to address the issues that we're facing in this country is being done in institutions like Trinity, like UCT, like NUIG. But there's a disconnect between the academic world and the political world. And I believe that's where the Seanad comes forward. So I advocate for putting forward policies that are not informed just by good intentions, but also by evidence and by research. And that is what I advocate to do in the Seanad.
Thank you, Ryan. Aubrey.
Thank you, Ursula. The question, so how would I affect policy and progress on a national level? I believe I've already used my position as a private citizen to affect change. In the last 4 years, I've spoken to the joint houses of the Oireachtas on issues such as health, homelessness, housing and gambling. And one example that I can give you where I have made a difference, you've probably seen upstairs, I brought a banner of a housing development that we've done in Greystones recently. It's a livable community that we've come up with in Greystones. Some people might think it's an easy thing to do. I had to work with the Department of Housing, the Department of Health. The Department of Housing said it's a health issue. The Health Department said it's a housing issue. So trying to get that over the line was difficult. But thank God today we have 34 apartments overlooking the sea in Greystones, a big blue building if you don't know it. We also have, we're turning the sod on 15 apartments for the elderly. We've opened a social enterprise there just in November, which is serving the best coffee in Ireland. And also we have a sauna, so you can have a sauna and then jump in and have a dip. But that development won the National Housing Awards last year, and President Higgins was interviewed and he was on the news, 6-1 News and the 9, and he said that this should be the type of facility that should be repeated in every county in Ireland. So that's talking about on a national level. At the moment I have plans in with Kildare County Council for a similar livable community where social, private housing, social enterprise, all of it can come together and it can work well. I have also just completed 12 apartments for young people coming out of care, and that's in Gigginstown in Naas, if any of you know it. Beautiful facility, and it's to try and give young people a chance, and I believe that could be repeated in every county of Ireland also. We have a new facility coming up for women that have suffered abuse, and it's going to be a transitional housing development for them. One thing I've always been very strong on, as well, as trying to get residents in all these facilities to register to vote.
Thank you, Aubrey. Patricia.
Thank you. My motivation for actually running for the Seanad this time, I've never ran for the Seanad before, and there are two main concerns. One is in relation to the lack of balanced debate in Irish society, and it's got worse actually over the last 2 years, where we only hear one side of the argument. So therefore we have people all living in these echo chambers, only talking to and listening to those they agree with. And I don't believe that's actually healthy for democracy. I think we need to open up the debate and allow both sides to be heard. Whether we agree with the other side or not, it doesn't matter. We still have to hear them, and I think it's extremely important, because whatever decisions are arrived at, it will be through balanced, open debate, and I've a long track record on that in relation to a case I took against the government on the issue. The second thing is in relation to reform of the Seanad, because as we've all said here tonight, the Seanad is an extremely important house of the Oireachtas. It's the one that's supposed to vet the legislation coming from the Dáil, and it's supposed to have an input. The big problem is how the Seanad is selected the seats. There are only the 6 university seats that are anyway democratically elected, and even within that, as people have said, it's the elite third level education students from certain colleges who are allowed to vote. The 7th Amendment was never acted on, so the other colleges from around the country aren't allowed to vote. But the key thing is the panels and the appointment by the Taoiseach. The Taoiseach appoints 11, and the rest are basically horse traded underneath the table. And it's through the political parties that this horse trading takes place, which means that those senators are not independent. They have to look over their shoulder at their party leader in the Dáil in relation to what position they take on any bills that comes before them. That is not what the Seanad was meant to be. We had a referendum. There were people saying we want to abolish it. Other people said we wanted to reform it. I was in favour of keeping the Seanad, and I was in favour of reform. We've got nothing on that since, and that would be a priority, because we need the Seanad to be an effective scrutiniser of legislation coming from the Dáil, and that means we have to have the people inside the Seanad independent of the parties in the Dáil.
Thank you, Patricia. Maureen.
I too actually supported, and on public record, for opposing the then Taoiseach Enda Kenny's proposal to abolish the upper chamber. And I think we don't just need voices from both sides. We need voices from many, many perspectives. And there is any single issue that we debate of any substance has a psychological dimension to it. It starts with the person. And you cannot expect somebody or from a family that is already struggling to keep body and soul together, to have, without sometimes, and people with no homes who have no bed to sleep on. You can't expect people like that to start turning their attention to climate change and issues and wars and world peace. You can only do that when you have your basic psychological and physical needs met. Only 5% of all the money that we spent on health, a mere 5%, is spent on mental health. And yet it is a component of everything that we do. And it is going to be my absolute priority in the Senate to promote the proper funding of the mental health services to meet not just the old demand that was already unmet, but the absolutely unprecedented pressure on the psychological and psychiatric services now as a result of the 2 years of COVID that we've endured.
Thank you, Maureen. Hugo.
Thanks, Ursula. There are 2 main reasons why I decided to run for the Seanad. The first you heard about with the Centre for Intellectual Disabilities. The second is North-South and British-Irish relationships, something I've been involved in all my adult life. When I had the privilege of playing rugby for Ireland in the end of the Troubles, people said, it's great you all play together and the Troubles are never mentioned. But that was fine as far as it went. But we did talk about it and learnt a lot. And I got to know so much about the complexities and the nuances in Northern Ireland, and came to love and admire the people, and some of the people there are my closest friends. But times are difficult there at the moment, and relationships are as challenged as I've ever seen them, both British-Irish and North-South relations. There's need for a strong voice and trusted voices who have the credibility and authority to speak and to understand these complexities. And I spent over the years, as my role as chairman of the British Irish Association, as chairman of the Ireland Funds, Cooperation Ireland, the Peace International, have built up a sort of credibility, but more importantly, relationships across this island that will be very valuable. There's a lot of talk about the Good Friday Agreement providing for a border poll. Yes, it does. But in the opening paragraphs, the 2 paragraphs of the Good Friday Agreement talks about the need for tolerance and reconciliation. And that is a prerequisite for anything, any constitutional position that we follow. And that's something that is sorely lacking at the moment. The second part of the question was about other national issues. And I think there's a need for a strong business voice in the Seanad. I've worked in business for nearly 40 years in the United States, in London, in Hong Kong, and now in Dublin, most recently in Dublin, working with Irish companies, helping them grow, helping them expand, helping them to create employment. And that's so much important now. And especially as we come out of the pandemic, it's really important that it's done in a climate-friendly way, and everything is looked at through the prism of sustainability. Thank you.
Hugo.
Thanks, Ursula.
There's been a lot of discussion on the previous panel here tonight about the need for urgent climate action and issues of energy security, and I won't go back over territory others have covered, bar to emphasise that there is no climate justice without social justice. This is the fight of our lives for our lives, and it is vital that we ensure a just transition which brings all parts of society with us. I secured a commitment to a just transition in the Dublin City Development Plan and will bring that emphasis to the Seanad also. I've worked as a campaigner and an activist on repeal, on separation of church and state in education, and on a public and secular national maternity hospital over the past decade. The progress on divesting our public services has been achingly slow, and the government commitment to doing so notably absent. Finally, the housing crisis cannot go unmentioned. A previous speaker referred to the necessity of getting housing right with regard to energy efficiency and dereliction. But the reality is our government parties have endorsed and encouraged disastrous housing policy. SHDs, build to rent, courting vulture and cuckoo funds, and it is this unchecked financialisation of our housing that has led to the locked-out generation and generation rent. I brought a motion to Dublin City Council to create a zoning which protects land for social and affordable housing use, rather than high-price build-to-rent. I built alliances on the Council to ensure majority support for this. The planning regulator shot this down, citing legislation, but legislation is not immutable. Legislation which is contrary to the public good needs to be changed. Unlike some, I have only ever worked in the public interest. And in the Seanad, I will work to deliver legislation which is truly in the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And now we're on to the third and final question. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Irish government has responded with sanctions and humanitarian action. Do you think the government should be doing more? And if so, what, as a senator, would you suggest they do? Ade.
Thank you. It is highly commendable that the Irish government is showing compassion and empathy in offering safety and safe haven to up to 100,000 people. However, it will take conscious collaborations and communication in order to integrate such a large number of newcomers into our society. As someone who was once a newcomer myself, and having now established myself and my family in the country, I am prepared to help shape the policy to help these people to be well settled. Moreover, if elected, I will hold the government accountable to ensure that it fulfills all the promises it's making to the Ukrainians. Electing me is a signal that Ireland can finally be considered as a truly inclusive nation, and that the Seanad is no longer an old boys club. Electing me speaks better than 10 billion of words that we are finally ready as Irish people to enter into a new global level that will demonstrate to those suffering under the authoritarian and oppressive regime that there is no political post in Ireland that is reserved for exclusive people. Finally, as encapsulated in my intertwined priorities, please check my website for details. Do not vote until you get to my website to have a flavor, a very good flavor of me. If elected, I will work with stakeholders, explore the possibility of establishing Trinity School of Government, a center of excellence through which Ireland can truly contribute further to the culture of true democratic value worldwide.
Thank you, Ade. Giselle.
Thank you, Ursula. By Ireland being neutral doesn't necessarily mean that Ireland is passive. It doesn't mean that we don't take sides in terms of international law. It doesn't mean that we don't take sides and condemn when a country breaks international human rights. You condemn countries that are breaching international law and international human rights. If the UK has the gumption to sanction Chelsea when they're third in the Football League and have 26 games played, where the leader has 28 games played, then I'm calling on the Irish government to introduce similar sanctions against the Russian money parked in the IFSC. As of last year, there was 34 billion of Russian money in the IFSC in different vehicles, and that needs to be really scrutinised. And I will call on the government to scrutinise that, because I do not want our country to be a place that harbours oligarch funding. Also, Ireland, as part of a small country with a small army, we can talk about a war, but war is wrong. And the rest of the world, because lots of countries around the world have no interest in talking to NATO, have interest in talking to Ireland. Our strength is that we got elected onto the Security Council in the UN. Our strength is that we can create corridors of peace throughout Europe, corridors of peace where people can speak when they do not want to engage with NATO. All of these sanctions that around the world are being implemented, we need to also look at really knuckling down and implementing the same here. And I call on the Geneva Convention. The Geneva Convention was written for war. Putin has floundered and flouted around with the Geneva Convention, and the Irish people need proper representation to call on the government. Stand up and call on our government.
Thank you, Giselle. Ryan.
I think anyone who has been watching the news will feel an immense amount of empathy with the suffering that's being endured by the Ukrainian people. And naturally, I think this goes on into asking ourselves, what can we do as a country to ease their suffering? And in many ways, this has moved on into whether our neutrality is holding us back from assisting, for instance, in military terms. However, I think we should actually view our neutrality as being one of the things we can assist them with the most, because, truth be told, we're not a hard power and we never will be a hard power. But in many ways, we are a soft power. We have been described as such by The Economist, and this is exemplified by our having a seat at the Security Council at present. And so we should use that, and we should use our neutrality to give us a certain level of gravitas, that when we're speaking on this, we're not speaking because we're a member of military alliance. When we criticize the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we're not criticizing it as a member of NATO. We're criticizing it because it is wrong. And we should use our neutrality, and we should use our national and our international voice that our diplomacy gives us to criticise this and to exert as much pressure as we can on the Russian regime to de-escalate and to withdraw. But we shouldn't view our neutrality as silencing our voice. Rather, we should view our neutrality as giving us a voice of reason and of justice in a time when everything seems to be going upside down.
Thank you, Ryan. Aubrey.
Thanks, Ursula. I was excited today at the news of the meetings in Turkey between the foreign ministers of the Ukraine and Russia. And I do hope that diplomatic routes will bring some easing to the conflict. Regarding the Irish government, I believe that the government needs to make sure that the mistakes of the direct provision model are not repeated while bringing Ukrainian refugees into Ireland. As Ryan suggested, Ireland's strength is not found in being a military power, but our strength is in offering humanitarian aid and also opening our doors. As somebody mentioned, there's 12,000 families that have already said they're going to open up their homes to refugees. It's basically fostering families in Ireland for 6 months to a year. Not too sure how long-term that works out, because these people need a lot more than just a roof over their heads. They have psychosocial needs that needs to be supported. And I think the government needs to make sure that the needs and supports are dovetailed, so that when a mother arrives with her children in Galway or Castlebar or Kildare, that they have the community provisions, they have the cultural and social integration piece. And remember, the direct provision model never was good on social inclusion. So I do feel that, I know with my experience with Tiglin, we focused on helping women and children that have come out of trauma, and I think this will be very similar. I will say this week I have been working with the Red Cross to take in 50 families, and we're hoping that that'll come to fruition by the end of this week, where we can not only provide accommodation, that it won't be provided in a vacuum, but all of the psychological supports, etc. We rely on the experts who we work closely with, and we believe we can make a difference.
Thank you, Aubrey. Patricia.
Thank you, Ursula. The invasion of Ukraine is illegal, in my opinion. War crimes are happening as we speak. And it is good to see that the international community is speaking out against what's happening. My just one little regret is that they didn't speak out on Yemen, on Afghanistan, on Iraq and other places. It almost seems like, because it's closer to home, somehow that, you know, white Westerners or almost Westerners or whatever you want to call them, that we can speak out on that. I just feel it's not fair to those that are suffering as we speak, for example, in Yemen. We need to talk about all wars, and we need to address all wars in the same way. Now, in relation to Ukraine, Ukraine is a country that has suffered dramatically under Stalin and then under Hitler. Don't forget Babi Yar. I was in Ukraine just after the Cold War. Babi Yar is a place in Ukraine where the biggest single massacre in the Holocaust took place, where almost 34,000 Jews were killed inside 2 days. So the Ukrainians have a lot to be concerned about. Interestingly enough, that Babi Yar was brushed under the carpet for some strange reason for many years. Even when I was in the Ukraine, people didn't really know about it, Ukrainians themselves, so it was quite unusual. What I want to get now to is what the government are doing. I feel that the government have actually failed to use their neutrality constructively and positively. We got a seat at the UN, and one of the reasons we got the seat at the UN was because we were a neutral country. Statements from our government and from Minister Coveney, etc., criticising the ambassador, calling him a liar, is not helpful, because we all know ambassadors are told to say what their government and what Putin at home is telling him, and also to expel the ambassador. That is not keeping lines of communication open. I feel it's unfortunate that our government has not done enough, and I would agree with what was said previously by my Iraqi friend in relation to, and he knows from experience what it's like to live through a war. We need to ensure that we keep communications open, that we keep dialogue open, and that we use our neutrality positively. And I think that Simon Coveney has to reconsider his position, and we can't align ourselves simply with NATO. We need to remain neutral to ensure peace is negotiated.
Maureen.
Well, I think the government, by and large, has done pretty well so far. They were first out of the blocks to condemn the invasion, and they have been strong in their support for for Ukraine. And I say that as somebody who has zero political affiliation with any party, but credit where credit is due. But I think now they're not just going to face the challenge of getting homes for the Ukrainian families. If they're going to stay here, they can't live in someone's front room for the next couple of months. But we already have a housing crisis here, so they're going to have a job on their hands. They're also going to have to mobilise a whole lot of mental health professionals to deal with the post-traumatic stress that a lot of these families are going to suffer from, not least children who have seen and heard things that no child should ever have seen. And I think they need to keep up the pressure on our EU colleagues and partners to deepen and widen the sanctions on Russia until they really bite. And when they go on their excursions around the world on St. Patrick's Day to offer people bowls of shamrock, I think they should plant a Ukrainian flag right in the middle of every bouquet of shamrock.
Thanks, Maureen. Hugo.
Thanks, Ursula. I think the situation in Ukraine is sort of highlighted by where we're sitting now in this beautiful sort of evening, exercising the democratic process in a way that's open and respectful and inclusive, and how different that is from what the people of Ukraine are facing up to. The other thing is, well, it's not just difficult to say something new about Ukraine at this stage of the evening when so many have commented. There's a very fundamental problem that language kind of breaks down. There should be a special category of language that we can only use for those awful events like we saw yesterday. But often, sometimes the words that we use, disaster, nightmare, are words that we use about so many ordinary things. And I think what the suffering and the people of Ukraine has shown is just how hard it is even to sort of explain it. I think on the government, it's very important that the EU has done well in this, that there's EU unity on sort of the measures that they take. And I think the EU has been very strong in actually sort of running through this crisis. And if you actually look at what that was compared, I would say, to what's going on in the UK, where I think they've been much less impressive in terms of reacting to what's gone on, that I think we should put that in context. I completely agree with the speakers who talk about the need for the humanitarian approach and make that effective and make that generous and efficient. And the great thing about the Irish people is that we've got a long history and tradition of that. I think, ladies and gentlemen, it has thrown up a whole question about our defence and security strategy, and maybe need to look at it. And are we really sure what neutrality means in this day and age? And the good thing is, and going back to closing where I started, with the democratic process, this is the ideal thing for a citizens' assembly to help discuss and tease out all of the very complicated issues facing this, but it is a matter of life and death.
Thank you, Hugo. Catherine.
We've all watched in disbelief and horror in recent weeks as the invasion of Ukraine has unfolded. I have 2 young children, and watching Ukrainian mothers trying to get small children to move distances makes my heart ache. We've all been in a situation where a small child has sat down and refused to walk any further. Imagine facing that in a situation as serious as this, while walking into this kind of uncertainty. We can, we should, and we must extend full solidarity to the Ukrainian people. Putin has been allowed for far too long to undermine democracy and transparency, attacking sovereign nations and sowing discord in Western democracies through disinformation and backdoor alliances. Sanctions should have been imposed long before we reached this crisis. The government's generous response to Ukrainian refugees is right and appropriate, but our compassion and support should not be confined to Europe, and this emphasises the need, in the face of international conflict and climate crisis, to stand down Fortress Europe. I was looking earlier at the pictures of the reception area in Dublin Airport, full of food, drink, nappies, all the things that should be there, and I'm very glad it's in place. But it does pose the question, why have these facilities not been in place for those seeking asylum prior to this? The state has moved quickly to waive certain bureaucratic impediments in terms of residency, PPS numbers, access to services, and that's really great to see. But the state will have to do more than extend the right to use those services. It will have to adequately resource them. And what is unfortunate is that in the years before this crisis, years of low inflation and cheap finance, we didn't use that time to build and improve our public services, healthcare, childcare, housing, and these services will now be so stretched. Our government have failed to plan in the good times for bad times to come, and I hope this government does not fail in its obligations to those arriving traumatised and grieving.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, we've put all 3 questions to you, but before we finish, each one of you will now have 1 minute to make a general pitch for yourselves. Tell us, why should anyone vote for you? Ade.
Thank you. I have given you this evening a flavour of the diversity of my profession and the education that I will bring into the Seanad. There is another aspect of me that is unmatched in this election, a uniqueness that is unprecedented in the 100 years of the Seanad and the 430 years of Trinity College, educating everyone from every part of the world, including people like me. Over 1 in every 5 persons on the street is from the new communities. Out of the 949 local councillors, only 9 are from the new communities, and there is no representation whatsoever at the parliamentary level. As a candidate who is truly independent, unfettered in every sense of the word, and having lived in your midst for the last 20 years, this year, we have an history of electing the first provost. Might we take this openness further by electing the first African Irish as the Trinity Senator? Thank you.
Thank you, Ade. Giselle.
I have dedicated in service to Trinity 20,000 plus hours over the last 5 or 6 years. I sat down one night to count them. People say that's a lot of hours, actually, if you were to break it down. I work 18-hour days. I sleep very little. If I go to the Seanad, I'll be taking the same passion and the same investment and the same care with me. We've working families struggling on the ground all over Ireland. I know because they ring me about voting for the Seanad and who they should vote for and why they should vote for me. And I explain to them what I've done and why they should vote for me, because I'll continue to listen to them if I go to the Seanad. We need real recovery. We need to invest in our stakeholders and to listen to our stakeholders. I fought for so many things inside the gates. College Park, the Science Gallery, students coming to me for the cost of living, students with their suitcases outside accommodation being thrown out, students thrown out because of their race, students thrown out because people don't understand the visa processes that they have to go through, and they're getting on airplanes trying to go home to their parents crying. I believe it's a huge responsibility to serve in the Seanad.
Thanks, Giselle. Ryan.
I'm running for the Seanad to advocate for a new type of politics, one that puts forward policy that is informed by evidence and research, not mantra and divisive rhetoric. The Seanad is our permanent citizens' assembly, where members have the privilege to scrutinise and put forward policy that can shape our country's present and develops a strategic vision for our future. I believe we should view the Seanad as a gateway for cohesive policy, not as a gateway to the Dáil. Our society's problems will not be resolved merely by debates in the Seanad, but the policy that is shaped by the Seanad can help shape a fair society where people, regardless of their background, are given the best possible chance to fulfill their potential. I don't ask you to vote for me for who I am. I ask for your vote because you understand the value of the approach that I advocate to bring to the Seanad, one that is committed to promoting evidence, research-informed policy and a strategic view for our country. Thank
you, Ryan. Aubrey.
Thank you, Ursula. Admittedly, I'm not well known and my name is sort of unusual. I was out canvassing there recently and the woman opened the door and she said, "Oh, your ovaries, McCarthy." So you can sort of see it's unusual. But I will tell you that I have been passionate about making difference and driving change. Michael D said many years ago on the Dáil floor that there should be a floor below which nobody should be allowed to fall, whether that's in relation to health, housing or education. He quoted Amartya Sen, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, by saying the test of your citizenship is your ability to participate in society without shame. Well, that's what equality is all about. I have fought for people because of my own dysfunctional background. That has propelled me to fight for the rights of the homeless, for women that have suffered trauma and abuse, children of addicts, and I've made a significant difference in each of these areas. So I'm asking you to consider my pledges and see that I'm already doing what I'm proposing to do. And I know that the only political currency that matters is changed lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Aubrey. Patricia.
Thank you, Ursula. I believe that people should vote for me because, well, I have a reputation, first of all, of standing up for the principles of what I believe in, regardless of the cost. And I think that's very important. I think the Seanad needs more people in there who don't have political parties behind them. And by the way, I am completely independent of any political party that don't have political parties behind them, telling them from behind what they must do and what the position is. We need the Seanad to be totally independent of the Dáil so it can actually scrutinise the legislation without any fear of repercussion from party leaders or other politicians in the Dáil. I believe that for myself, I think standing up for what you believe is extremely important. I also think that my own track record, I was a member of the European Parliament for 10 years. I was involved in drafting legislation. I was involved in negotiating legislation. I was involved with the conciliation procedures with the Council, Commission and the European Parliament. I have a long track record on politics and being effective in the European Parliament. And my study in Trinity, I think, gave me that extra added advantage of the law and politics, which I am very grateful to Trinity for.
Thank you, Patricia. Maureen.
Well, I think anything that I do in life, I bring great energy to it and a certain amount of determination. I think I'm a good judge of what's possible in situations and when it's right to push for a lot more. I think I'm very good, and I have a track record in the various public bodies that I've chaired. I think I'm very good at getting people to collaborate. In my work with the National Economic and Social Forum, I managed to bring together, despite all the Cassandras, the representatives of different political parties, the employers, the trade unions, and the community and voluntary sector together, and we managed to do the work without anyone walking out in high dudgeon. But I'm a great believer in Edmund Burke, and he said that every generation inherits their society only for a loan, and the job is to pass it on undamaged and hopefully in better shape to the next generation. That's why I'm going up for the Seanad.
Thank you, Maureen. Hugo.
Thanks, Ursula. I'm highlighting my 3 priority areas, which I've worked on for many years and making some real impact. But if I had the benefit of the Seanad, I could do so much more. The first is to continue the remarkable work of the Centre for People with Intellectual Disabilities. Secondly, continue to build and rebuild North-South and British-Irish relations. I'm a strong and trusted voice on that front, and I could do so much more if I was actually in the Oireachtas. But I want to be a strong voice for large and small businesses right across the country. But I'm deeply committed to Trinity, and I have always consistently been. As a student there, I backed the anti-apartheid movement by not going to tour in South Africa with the Irish rugby team, even though selected, because of the apartheid regime at the time. I was a foundation scholar, had the pleasure of studying economics and then Anglo-Irish literature with the remarkable Brendan Kennelly and David Norris. I was captain of the rugby club here before representing Trinity for Leinster, Ireland and the British and Irish Lions. And also now consistently, I'm a current ambassador in addition to the TCPID, with Trinity, with sport, and with also a sitting member of the Trinity Trust and Association.
Thank
Trinity
you.
is in my blood.
Thank you. Catherine.
Thank you. Ireland is more than an economy, more than FDI and GDP. We are a society first and foremost. I believe in a politics fuelled by compassion, fairness and accountability, and I believe that those are the values fostered in Trinity also. We have a long tradition of sending advocates for social justice to the Seanad. Let's honour that tradition by electing a senator who will hold government to account. As a campaigner and activist, I have fought for secular healthcare and education, public housing and universal access to affordable childcare, healthcare and elder care. When I worked in the Trinity Access programmes, our mission was to widen access and promote equality, and I firmly believe a more equal society is one which benefits us all. As a public representative on Dublin City Council, I've worked to deliver commitments to a just transition in our climate action, zoning for affordable housing, and have secured recognition in the City Development Plan of our obligations under the UN Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. I'm asking for your #1 vote for me, Catherine Stocker, to drive the change we need.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, that brings us to the conclusion of the hustings for the 2022 Seanad Bye-Election. You have heard 16 of the 17 candidates speak here tonight. Please show our panel your appreciation. I hope it's been a helpful exercise, and now it's over to you, to whoever is eligible to vote. And it's time to get voting if you haven't already voted. Remember, you must return your ballot papers by free post to Trinity College before Wednesday, the 30th of March. And do take delivery time into consideration, and be sure to post your vote well ahead of the final date. It only remains for me now to thank again the 16 candidates for taking part, and to you for being such an attentive and wonderful audience. Special thanks too to the scholar students, Ellen and Usheen, who looked after the bell. Well done to you. You did a terrific job. And they were very good because they've kindly volunteered their time to this event this evening. But special thanks too to Kevin Nocton and Tom Malloy from the Communications Department of Trinity, and to Valerie and the entire AV team here in Trinity for doing such a good job organising the event tonight. Thank you all, and good night.